Dead by Daylight needs to change. This asymmetrical multiplayer horror game has been a major part of my life for the past 2 years. It has been a rocky relationship, to say the least. In July 2021, I released a 40-minute long video essay on the topic. I addressed some things that make the game great, and a lot of things that make it not that. This video made no visible impact on the negative aspects of the game or its community, and that wasn't exactly the intention. It was more of an excuse for me to rant for a while, to get some grievances out of my system, and maybe, finally, move on to a different comfort game. Where's that laugh coming from? Okay, so after having spent literally 1,000 hours more on the game, I now bring you a video that is a genuine attempt to start something. To create the change that Dead by Daylight so desperately needs. Even if you're not a fan of this game, even if you haven't played it even once, I'm going to show you some interesting findings about the ways players interact and can interact with one another when the rules of a video game are broken. This is the Wholesome Bubba project. I've spent months writing a 30+ page study under the same name as this video. It's fully available to read right now, the link is down below. It's not exactly on the level of a peer-reviewed university-level study, but it's somewhat structured like one. Look, my student loans can't be for nothing. This video is going to be a summary of this study, some of my results, and my conclusion. But first, some background. In short, Dead by Daylight has one player in the role of a killer character facing off against 4 other players in the role of survivors in these one-sided death matches or trials. The killer's goal is to hunt, hit, and carry the survivors to sacrificial hooks scattered around the map, and have them stay there until either the timer runs out and they die, or until a fellow survivor comes to the rescue. It normally takes 2 hits for a survivor to go down, and 3 hooks for a survivor to permanently die. The goal of the survivors is to avoid the killer, by hiding, running, looping around obstacles, blocking and stunning the killer with wooden pallets, and jumping through windows. That probably won't work forever though, so the more permanent solution is to work on a total of 5 randomly spawned generators which power 2 exit gates. Get one of those open, and you're free to go. Opening a gate triggers the so-called endgame collapse, meaning that any survivor who has not left the trial before the timer reaches 0 is instantly killed on the spot. Now let's gather all of these rules together and throw them in a bin. Since there's no explicit time limit forced on any of the players, apart from the ones they put on themselves, a trial in Dead by Daylight can potentially go on for as long as an hour, in which case the trial will automatically shut down to prevent players from holding the game hostage. However, this is way more time than any trial will normally take. This freedom is what makes the Wholesome Bubba project possible. The project revolves around the licensed character named the Cannibal, otherwise called Leatherface, or Bubba. The Cannibal is often and rightfully associated with some of the more toxic tendencies among the game's player base. Due to his ability to down a survivor with a single chainsaw attack, at any point in the game, you'll seldom be surprised to see a Cannibal player camping right in front of a sacrificial hook, waiting to swiftly strike down any player who attempts to save their captured teammate. It's equally unsurprising to see the same player use either of their weapons to repeatedly hit the hooked survivor. This doesn't benefit the killer from a gameplay perspective, it's simply rudeness for rudeness' sake. The character has also been the subject of a significant controversy. When he was originally introduced in September of 2017, the Cannibal had the ability to unlock skin masks based on the appearances of the game's original 4 survivors, one of which is black. This resulted in some killer players deliberately using her mask to emulate the racist act of wearing blackface. The harmful intent was implied by how they used this particular cosmetic item and exclusively harassed people playing as black survivors while wearing it. As of January 2022, the item is no longer available in the game. But I think it's worth noting that Dead by Daylight players had the option to wear blackface for over 4 years before it was removed. Lastly, there is the more general issue of hostility in the Dead by Daylight community. Any competitive video game is bound to bring out some strong emotions in people. What makes Dead by Daylight stand out is that some players have made it their sole mission to actively evoke these emotions by harassing killer players for their own enjoyment. This is in fact so common that there's even a name for it: bully squads. If you ever happen to find yourself in the same lobby as one of these squads, and you will, the survivor players will make it their #1 priority to blind you with flashlights, stun you with pallets, and by jumping out of lockers, loop and teabag around you, to the point that they sometimes don't even work on generators. Sure, they might get some funny clips out of it that will end up in some Killers Getting Owned compilation on YouTube, but they only get that footage by going out of their way to be assholes and ruining the experience for other players. The lucrative nature of this type of content has made it so that some YouTube creators have profited highly both from being bullied by others and by being bullies themselves. Typing the words Dead by Daylight Toxic in the YouTube search bar will generate a flood of video suggestions about the most toxic Dead by Daylight streamer ever, toxic player doing this, and toxic player doing that, so on and so forth. Calling out bad behavior is obviously a good thing. That the problems are being monetized for entertainment value rather than being seriously discussed is not. Naturally, it's up to the developers to try and make their game and community as nice and inviting as possible, but the community can still make an effort to do better by themselves. That's what I want to try to do. The idea behind what I've chosen to call the Wholesome Bubba is to put a counterweight on this more toxic aspect of the Dead by Daylight community, to show how the cannibal can potentially be used as a force for good. Yeah, that's a sentence that sounds pretty troubling out of context. During the course of 50-so trials, I attempted to play as the cannibal without sacrificing, downing, or even harming a single survivor. That's easy though. I could have gotten results simply by leaving the game running while I stare into the bathroom mirror trying to find what remains of my soul. There's just nothing there! But that wouldn't have made the game any more wholesome. In order for Wholesome Bubba to live up to his name, I needed to offer an alternative to regular play. Something I decided to call wholesome play. This term is gonna come up a lot, so let's define it real quick. Wholesome play isn't just about rejecting the intended rules of a game. It's about coming together across enemy lines, so to speak, and collectively come up with activities that focus on nothing but having fun. More importantly though, it's supposed to be a positive palate cleanser, no pun intended. If you've played several trials in a row against killer players who are either way better than you, or who are just really mean, the purpose of a wholesome trial is to reinvigorate the joy of playing this game. So how is a Wholesome Bubba supposed to go about spreading this joy? Let's go through it step by step. To encourage survivor players to take part in wholesome play, there needs to be a clear way for the Wholesome Bubba to communicate his intentions. Dead by Daylight doesn't offer any in-game text or audio-based communication during gameplay, and unlike survivors, killer players don't have any dedicated buttons for making communicative gestures. So the first thing I needed to do while conducting this study was to come up with ways of gaining the trust of the survivor players with the very limited tools I did have. This presented the occasional challenge, since the first thing survivor players tend to do when they spot a killer is to scatter like flies. I learned that a Wholesome Bubba can solve this in one of two ways. Either you can use your mouse or right thumbstick to make Bubba do a nodding motion, giving the survivors some positive affirmation. Or you can be a goofy little guy and just spin around. I wouldn't recommend this to people who easily get motion sickness from playing games from a first-person perspective, but while your screen will quickly become a blurry mess, it will clearly signal to the survivor players that you have no intention of taking the trial seriously. If a survivor allows you to get close, you can also give them a friendly boop. This first step will often require you to be persistent, but not too persistent. It's sometimes necessary to give survivors some space and let them observe that you're playing around with the others before they finally let their guard down. Those are the do's, but what about the don'ts? First off, no chainsaw. Ever. No one hears the revving of a chainsaw and believes that anything but a slaughter or the cutting of a tree will follow. And Bubba is no lumberjack. The chainsaw's ability to instantly down survivors is one of the primary reasons why the cannibal has such a bad reputation to begin with, and the Wholesome Bubba is supposed to distance himself from that reputation as much as possible. so no chainsaw. While I generally didn't want to use Bubba's hammer either, since it implies violence, I couldn't deny the cases where it was useful. Bubba can't make gestures, as previously mentioned, so swinging the hammer was an effective substitute for when I wanted survivors to go in a specific direction or perform a specific task. It seldom felt like something I had to do though. The one situation where I was forced to use the hammer was when a survivor purposefully body blocked me into a corner. In an attempt to show my displeasure, I used the camera to shake Wholesome Bubba's head, but the survivor didn't budge. I tried waiting, but that didn't work either. So eventually I hit them, which also didn't change anything. So, despite the Wholesome Bubba's code, I was forced to down the survivor in order to regain my bodily autonomy. Nobody puts Bubba in a corner, and ignoring consent isn't wholesome. This works both ways as well. If a Wholesome Bubba player notices that a survivor might not be into the idea of wholesome play, if they even refuse to be near you, that needs to be respected. No one can be forced to have a wholesome time. This rule stands even when all survivors refuse to participate in wholesome play. The mission of a Wholesome Bubba is positive, and as such, it needs to respect consent. Always. This brings us to a dilemma. Wholesome play doesn't elect winners or losers, nor is it about gathering points. However, Dead by Daylight is fundamentally built around these ideas. Even if you, as a Wholesome Bubba, are simply following a survivor around, the game will interpret this as a chase. This grants so-called blood points, the game's primary currency, both to you and the survivor player at the end of the trial. Unfortunately, this can't be avoided, but that doesn't mean that players should actively attempt to try and gather points. When survivor players notice that a killer player is being friendly, they often take that as an invitation to engage in point farming. They'll try to bring you along all across the map and use each and every single pallet to stun you. They'll try to get themselves hooked so that their teammates can get points for unhooking them. A Wholesome Bubba doesn't do or encourage any of that, because if gathering blood points becomes the focus, it's not much different from a regular trial. Once I learned how to befriend survivor players, I needed to figure out what to actually do with them. Thankfully, survivor players are a really creative bunch, and it's in large part thanks to their creativity that I've come up with a list of activities that you can try during a session of wholesome play. High and low vault loops. These activities are similar but different enough to have their own names. The high vault loop works almost like a playground slide. Everyone stands in a row and waits for their turn, as the player at the front jumps out of a window or falls from any kind of higher elevation, the higher floor of a building or a small hill, for example. Don't worry, survivors have really good knees and won't get hurt no matter how far they fall. And that's why you don't skip leg day. Low vault loops also uses windows, but takes place on ground level. The downside to this activity is that windows will be momentarily blocked for individual survivors after a specific number of vaults. A solution to this problem is to make sure that the game is played in a place with multiple windows. Maypole dancing. On each map, there is a basement with 4 sacrificial hooks standing back to back in the middle. The shape of these hooks is somewhat reminiscent of a traditional maypole, which are danced around during seasonal European festivities. Just like dancing during those festivities, dancing around the maypole in Dead by Daylight can be done in multiple ways. Clockwise, counterclockwise, backwards, fast, slow, while crouching. Yeah, I think that's it. Frankly, I feel like I wouldn't be much of a Swede if I didn't recommend an activity like this. Peekaboo! It's literally just peekaboo. If there's a wall or a Bubba-sized tree or rock nearby, the Wholesome Bubba player can play around with survivors by simply hiding and reappearing. Over and over again. Personally, I find this to be a fun game to play with survivors who are focused on generators. Rather than just waiting for them to be done, playing peekaboo can make waiting a little more fun, at the very least for the Wholesome Bubba player. Spin and circle dancing. If there's a relatively open space for all players to move around, any part of a map can become a dance floor. If the survivor players want to make things even more disco, they can also bring along some flashlights, making what was once a tool for harassment a tool for dance parties. Hell yeah! Tree and rock looping. If you're on a map with lots of trees and or larger rocks, you can use these to make improvised loops. Maybe you want to loop around trees standing opposite of each other, maybe you want to run around in a specific pattern, or say screw it to any kind of structure and just run around while trying not to hit each other. And finally, The endgame collapse party. Once an exit gate has opened, and there is at least more than one player close by, the endgame collapse party is a great way for everyone to give their final goodbyes and engage in some limited time fun. Players can dance, spin around, run, vault through nearby windows, slam and jump in and out of lockers, basically anything they want before the timer runs out. The endgame collapse party might even attract Survivor players who were previously cautious or afraid of the Wholesome Bubba. These are merely suggestions, though. What's fun about Wholesome Play is that you can make up basically any kind of activity you want, with or without clearly defined rules. What matters is that everyone is having fun. But during my study, I couldn't really tell if the Survivor players were having fun or not. I mean, to me it sure seemed like it, since so many players were totally on board with abandoning their objectives just to goof around. But I only had my interpretations of their actions and gestures to go on. What I needed was cold, hard facts. The majority of the trials I played were on PlayStation 5, and writing messages to other people on any of the console versions is quite inelegant. You have to click through a bunch of menus, and if players allow messages from people who aren't on their friends lists, you still have to type your messages with a controller. By the time you're done, the Survivor players will likely have started a different trial. For this reason, I also wanted to give the PC version a try, since this version has a post-trial chat that everyone can see. The feedback I got was limited. The replies I did get were positive though, so I was definitely on the right track. I needed more though, so I decided to write a post on Reddit where I linked to a Google form where people could tell me a little bit more about their feelings regarding Wholesome Play. There was, sadly, one thing that stood out in those replies.
If they're farming, I usually farm with them. More PP is never bad.
I'm always on board with farming. I love when we can take a step back from regular play and have a way to reward everyone in the trial.
If they don't hook survivors, break pallets, etc., they're robbing themselves of free BP.
If the killer does nothing, then they gain no blood points, which just ruins the point of the game.
When I'm playing killer without the intent to kill everyone, I get 2 hooks per survivor and chase to maximize everyone's BP, then let everyone go. Silly killer games with no hooks or chase feel like a waste of time, regardless of which side I'm playing.
Letting them hook me. Get on.
Mainly,
If actively farming and letting everyone hook and heal, etc., that's much
I'll
more
focus
fun
gens
and
once
lucrative
I'm
and
sure
wholesome.
everyone
I will
participating
happily
in farming
farm
should
and
have
put heart in
decent
chat.
BP.
When the killer wants to farm, I engage. And congratulations to you and the killer on your upcoming marriage.
19 people contributed to this form. The word points showed up 13 times in their replies. BP, short for blood points, showed up 8 times, and farming, as in the farming of points, showed up 17 times. This is obviously a simplification of the data. It doesn't reflect how many times these words were mentioned by a single person, and the community as a whole can obviously not be represented by 19 people alone. But I'd still argue that it is kind of telling. As I touched on before, blood points is completely antithetical to the idea of wholesome play. Since I've literally played over 1,000 hours of Dead by Daylight, I can totally see where the fixation on blood points comes from. Hell, I basically spent a whole section of my last Dead by Daylight video talking about them. However, I feel it's important not to forget what blood points actually are. As previously mentioned, when you play a trial of Dead by Daylight, you're rewarded with these points at the end. The amount you get is determined by how well the game thinks you performed. You then spend your points on items, add-ons, perks, and offerings. Things that will hopefully make it easier to earn even more blood points by the end of the next trial. Some offerings are specifically designed to raise the amount of blood points you get. And what do you do with those points when the next trial is over? Well, you spend them on items, add-ons, perks, and offerings. Blood points exist to be spent in order to be gained once again. The psychology behind the blood points economy is not too dissimilar to the psychology of gambling. There's no inherent joy in gaining blood points, and the joy they can provide is temporary by design. That's why I find it so disheartening to see that blood points might be what at least some Dead by Daylight players might associate most of all with killers trying to be wholesome. I think one of the reasons, maybe not the main reason, but one of them, why toxicity is so prominent in competitive video game spaces is because we simply care too much about the numbers. It's not strange that we do. We've been conditioned to, after all. We see numbers when we level up, when we gain more in-game currency, when we make further progress in the battle pass. Some games even have numbers flying all over the screen when you shoot or stab at enemies. There's a lot of dopamine to be gained there. Although, at a certain point, it's hard to see the fun for the numbers. I'm not saying it's an end-all fix-all, but since video game developers clearly aren't going to stop ramming numbers in our faces anytime soon, we may have to take it upon ourselves to reprogram our brains and learn to look away. You don't have to be the worst possible person to perpetuate toxicity either. I myself don't throw around racial slurs and blame it on heated gaming moments whenever I get tilted, but I would lie if I said I've never slammed my fist on my desk because something went badly in a video game. And every time that has happened for well over a decade, it has been because of numbers. Oh man, I only managed to kill one survivor. Great, I got more deaths than kills this game. And of course, I was this close to getting that trophy, but I failed again. The pursuit of good numbers can lead to some genuinely fantastic moments and memories. But if we focus too much on them, it's only gonna be harder to parse it when the numbers turn bad. I keep coming back to a Noah Gervais quote when thinking about this. I'm paraphrasing here, but the bottom line is that online multiplayer matches are essentially like cheeseburger wrappers in the back seat of your car. Cheeseburgers are reliable. They taste good. But the second you're done with one, you'll throw that wrapper right over your shoulder and almost instantly forget about it. Wholesome play is meant to offer something a little more permanent than that. Maybe you won't get memories for life, but at the very least, a Wholesome Bubba can put a smile on your face that hopefully will inspire you to treat others with equal amounts of kindness. There are some potential counterpoints to this idea that I think are worth bringing up. After all, isn't it in a sense infantilizing to treat the game and its players like you're all just hanging out on a preschool playground? Here's the thing. The base game of Dead by Daylight is, at its core, a mix of hide and seek, cops and robbers, and tag. As a survivor, you try to finish your objectives while hiding from the killer. Then it turns into a game of tag when the killer starts chasing you. And when a killer catches you, you go straight to jail, or in this case, a hook, forcing the other survivors, or robbers, to get you out. Dead by Daylight is literally a kid's game with spoopy Halloween costumes. And slightly more gore. Wholesome play is about boiling it all down to what video games actually are. It's pretend, it's make-believe, it's fun. I know I've said this before in some other video, but it is worth repeating. Everyone, children and adults alike, benefit from play. Playing Dead by Daylight like this sheds a light on the importance of that, I think. It shows why we're all playing this game in the first place. Well, if you think that Dead by Daylight is so toxic, why don't you just play a different game? That's not entirely the point, is it? When you commit to a social multiplayer game like Dead by Daylight, Overwatch, or Fortnite, that becomes a habit. If you or one of your friends get mad, none of you is gonna be switching to Animal Crossing to calm down. You all want to stay together, right? The game has then transcended from being just a game to a meeting spot. Hopping over to a different game would be like being the first one to leave a party, long before anyone has even dared to approach the karaoke machine. Also, I just don't find play another game to be an argument that puts the previous one in a particularly good light. It basically says that it's useless to try and fix or improve the game you're playing, so just play another one. It's an unfortunate way to look at things, especially in the case of Dead by Daylight, since players have such power to affect how the game is played. Well, if other players were to play as Wholesome Bubba, wouldn't some of them just pretend to be wholesome only to backstab the survivors by the end? This is definitely a risk. Some players go above and beyond to be toxic, no matter what. If you're watching this video and this is how you plan on using the idea of the Wholesome Bubba, well, you suck. But that's obviously what you're aiming for, isn't it? As long as there are more players who take the role of the Wholesome Bubba seriously than those who don't, I think that things can ultimately work out. The climate in the Dead by Daylight community is pretty toxic as it is. People impersonating Wholesome Bubbas for the sake of being grade A dickholes wouldn't change that very much. But I want to believe that even a single trial with a Wholesome Bubba can, at least temporarily, overshadow all that. During the heyday of Overwatch, me and a full squad of friends once played a game on the Blizzard world map. It started off as usual. One team tried to defend the first point, and the other tried to capture it. I don't remember how or when it happened, but suddenly, the entire enemy team decided to stop fighting. What followed was one of the most touching moments I've ever experienced in a video game. All we really did was sit around as a 12-person group, throwing voice lines at each other, dancing, and playing around with our characters' unique abilities. No one had suggested this in a voice or text chat. It just happened. And when the timer for the match eventually reached 0, we all just went our separate ways. I've played well over 1,000 hours of Overwatch, and the overall experience can be boiled down to a 4-year-long blur. I could not describe a single other Overwatch match I've ever played, even at gunpoint. But I will never forget that one. This is why I think this video is relevant even for those who don't play Dead by Daylight. Because anyone can be a Wholesome Bubba. In any game. You don't even have to play as Bubba in Dead by Daylight. As long as you stick to the rules of wholesome play, you can choose whichever killer you want. Should you always play the game like this? No, of course not. This is more of a play a couple of times per session type of thing. It's fairly low effort for a single person. But if a lot of people are doing it, that's when it will have a proper impact. Which leads us to the reason why this study was turned into a video. I don't see myself as the Dead by Daylight equivalent of someone like Let Me Solo Her from Elden Ring. The title of Wholesome Bubba is something I want to lend to each and every one of you. During the data collection phase, I saw some absolutely heartwarming results. During one of the first trials, I actually got a bully squad to put down their flashlights and engage in one of the earliest iterations of wholesome play. In retrospect, this was so gratifying. To me, it read like a clear sign that toxicity actually can be countered with kindness. And with this video and this study, I hope that other people can learn how to do the same. Again, the link is in the description. It goes into way more detail about which perks to use, which map offerings are more optimal for wholesome play, and so on. Even if this project doesn't result in anything grander, I'm still happy that I gave it a shot. It's cliché, I know, but I want to try and make the positive changes that I myself want to see in the world. And even though Wholesome Bubba ultimately represents a short and fleeting moment of kindness, I feel good about having given something, well, wholesome to strangers who might need it just as much, if not more, than I do. To me, that's worth more than any amount of blood points in the world. Seriously though, those student loans are no joke, so if you want to support me on Patreon, that would be great! Thank you so much for watching. And a special thanks to all the people who support me with $5 or more on Patreon. Their names are Anaday, Eben Phantom, Elizabeth Haste, Franz Johannes Feulner, Håvard Kugerud, Infernal Ramblings, Jack Lightfoot, Jesse Earl, L. Tantivy, Lesser Sage of Stars, Martha C., Mackenzie Pollock, Mechathug, Nichtschwert, Nick Owens, Professor Flowers, Sable Cowl, Setsard, Silkmoth, TB Skyen, Togi, Yuli Troyo, and Vinders. I also want to thank Mira Cox and Ali Meowie for proofreading the script, Ali Meowie, Aaron Ock, Dark Fry, David J. Bradley, Mira Cox and Pixel a Day for lending their voices, Aurora Hellström Orlov and Ludvig Wikman for lending their bathroom, and finally, Kristoffer Heyerdahl, Jonas Hagberg, and Oskar Sandström for helping me capture some additional gameplay footage. I don't do much call to action stuff on this channel, apart from me talking about my Patreon page. But if you're still here, I would love it if you not only liked the video and subscribed to the channel, but also clicked on the notification bell. I've had several of my viewers tell me they just weren't notified that I've released a new video. So since YouTube is doing a terrible job of reminding people that I actually exist, that little icon seems to be the only real solution to this problem. What else is there? Oh yeah, I'm gonna be in a freaking video game! This is literally one of the coolest things that's ever happened in my entire life. I got the part of a merchant character named Doll in the upcoming Shin Megami Tensei inspired horror game, They Speak from the Abyss. There's a demo you can check out right now, and please do, it's really freaking cool. The aesthetics are just to die for. And yeah, I guess that's it. See you in the next one.